Welcome back to the Spectre Creative Channel with me, your host, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich. And that is me. See, sometimes I put myself in the videos, not that much. And the reason is because this is a bit of a personal story. I've been in the toy industry for over 20 years, and I'm also a collector. And I hope this channel has kind of given me a little bit of street cred as far as insights and opinions. And while a lot of you know me as the brand manager for Masters of the Universe and DCU Classics over at Mattel, other folks know that I left Mattel to work for some other toy companies. And a big reason for that, and here's the personal part, I'm a Star Wars fan. I mean, I am a He-Man fan. I do love Masters of the Universe. But my number one brand and kind of my number one pop culture love has always been Star Wars. Yes, that's me on the right doing the jump lightsaber move against my best bud Brian. And here I am waiting in line for episode 1, wrapping around the theater. Yes, I was there, sleeping out in the tents, waiting for episode 1. I was that guy, and that much of a Star Wars fan. So you can understand why the lure of getting to work on Star Wars was, well, very alluring. And when Disney made the move to reverse that. When George Lucas made the move to sell Star Wars to Disney, well, that didn't just open opportunities for Disney to make Star Wars, it opened opportunities for me, because I was offered the chance to come to Jakks Pacific and be the marketing director over their Star Wars Big Figs line. Well, actually, over all the Big Figs, but even though there were DC and there were Turtles and all sorts of brands, it was really for Star Wars. I came over to Jakks and I left my awesome job at Mattel because I had the opportunity to work on Star Wars action figures, and that was my number one, and still is my number one toy love. I have every 3 3/4 original trilogy figure from 1995 through today. All in bins, all labeled, all with their accessories, as well as, many scattered throughout my office posed. But yes, I am absolutely an obsessive Star Wars action figure collector, and while I also collect Marvel Legends and Masters of the Universe and DC and all sorts of things, Star Wars is my number one love. And that's part of why I want to make this video today. So when the prequels came out, and as a lot of us, it was okay. It didn't quite live up to our hopes and dreams, but, it was cool. And then when the Disney movies started coming out, again, excited, thought this was it. We're going to get really great Star Wars movies again, because they could do anything. And again, they were okay. And in fact, while I worked on Force Awakens and I worked on Rogue One was good. Just to me, it kind of felt like a long deleted scene, if you will, from A New Hope. And Force Awakens was okay, and I guess the less said about Solo, the better. To say that the Disney movies have not exactly won over the hearts and minds of fans is a bit of an understatement, because while the prequels were, we kind of lived with them. They weren't great, but they weren't terrible. A lot of people feel like almost the 7, 8, 9 should be retconned out of existence and, wipe them out, all of them. And I think a big reason is because of this guy, Luke Skywalker, our childhood hero, my childhood hero. And in that scene in Return of the Jedi, when Yoda turns to Luke and says, pass on what you have learned, start a Jedi Academy, teach a new generation. That's kind of my whole life, what I thought we would see if there were, 7, 8, 9. We would see Luke presiding over a new generation of Jedi and training them to go against whoever, maybe, robot dinosaurs or, mole people. I mean, it didn't necessarily have to be a rehash of the Empire, because weren't they destroyed? And while Luke, did make an appearance in 7, 8, and 9, specifically in 8 was his kind of big appearance, this wasn't really the Luke that we were expecting. And in fact, even Mark Hamill started calling him Jake Skywalker, because his personality and his motives and the way he interacted with people was sort of so off of what Luke Skywalker would do. Even the actor who played him felt that it just wasn't right. And it became a whole thing that, this was some alternate reality with Jake Skywalker, not Luke Skywalker. And then they even killed him. I know, spoiler alert. Well, the movie came out years ago, so I don't think I need to put a spoiler alert. And it didn't just kill him, he just kind of forced himself to death, if you will. So, to me, that was kind of the low point. And then along comes The Mandalorian. And, expectations are checked, but wow, this show is like amazing right out the gate. It felt like Star Wars. And the reason Mandalorian felt like Star Wars is because it was just plopping a character down into the Star Wars universe. It wasn't agenda driven, it wasn't trying to reach any specific goal. It just felt like adventures in Star Wars land, if you will. And a big reason for that was the look and feel of the series. Because while it had, things we recognize and, characters returned even from the original trilogy, it didn't feel, no pun intended, forced. It felt very natural. So a good example of why Mandalorian works so well is, let's look at the bars. Mandalorian not just stepping into the actual Star Wars cantina, but he shows up at a lot of bars throughout the series. And all the bars kind of have the same look. It's, not polished, it's grim, it's gritty a little bit. This is what the cantina felt like. In the prequels, everything was spit shined and shiny and new. The bars were sports bars and diners out of, American Graffiti. And I get that they were on Coruscant, but it just didn't have that look and feel. Much like if you look at, especially A New Hope, all of the control panels have that very 1970s, early 80s color pattern with big buttons with, one light. And you saw that in The Mandalorian. All of the controls were very 1970s, early 80s. And that's very important because that was the look of Star Wars. And even though we have modern technology now where we can make the controls all CGI and cool, it didn't do that. All right, so getting back to the subject, why did Disney buy Star Wars? And this is going to be the heart of the matter because for years, I think a lot of fan sites and a lot of people doing pop culture videos have been more or less dancing around the issue because it's kind of, being a straight shooter and saying exactly what it is like pointing out the elephant in the room. And yes, I know that this Max Rebo toy and every Max Rebo toy is completely anatomically incorrect. He does not have feet like that. Go ahead and Google it. He actually he plays with his feet, not his hands. Okay. Besides that, elephant in the room being Star Wars is a boys' property. Ooh, look, there I said it. Oh my gosh. Yes, it's okay for properties to be boys' properties and girls' properties. And yes, there are toys that appeal to both. And there are very aspirational female characters in Star Wars. But unlike Lego or, beach toys, Star Wars is a definitively boys' property, much as Barbie is a girls' property. And I think this picture basically says it all. As far as the idea that Disney had an agenda, I mean, the head of Star Wars wearing a shirt that says the Force is female, surrounded by other female executives with the shirt on. I made a video recently about how spreadsheets are used to design characters, and it's so clear that Katniss inspired Rey, because Katniss made a lot of money and showed that an aspirational female could be merchandisable and could make money. And that fed into the spreadsheet that, let's do that with Star Wars now. Let's have Star Wars have a female lead, because now we could double our audience. It won't just be a boys' property, but if we make it with a Star Wars Katniss, it'll be a girls' property. And, I think this image from the Avengers, while not Star Wars, kind of says it all when all of the female, heroes show up for a charge and, no men allowed, trying to make females aspirational. Versus in The Mandalorian, it just happens naturally. The Mandalorian is overflowing with amazing aspirational females, and I'm hugely in favor of aspirational females. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against females at all. My wife is a female. My mother's a female. My daughter's a female. Females and males, whoever it is, doesn't matter the sex, this should always be organic in order to be aspirational. And when you create a character by a spreadsheet because one movie 5 years ago made a lot of money, well, it doesn't make the character aspirational. And The Mandalorian had all these females that are hugely aspirational and are awesome. So that was reason number one, was open Star Wars to the female audience. Reason number two, Chinese market. Yep, the other big reason that Disney bought Star Wars, besides making it female and doubling its audience from just boys, was conquering the Chinese market. China is huge when it comes to box office, and they only allow in a small number of US films each year. So the films that studios submit for consideration are, well, they're always the big ones, the blockbusters. They're not going to submit an art picture or, even a romantic comedy. They're going to submit the big ones, Avengers and Avatar and, Fast and the Furious movies. Transformers does huge in China. Star Wars, on the other hand, while a perfect candidate for a Chinese box office consideration as one of the few American films, the box office doesn't really work in China. And that was actually kind of the whole point, because since China is now half of the box office, the idea of making movies that could play in China and specifically casting Chinese actors to play roles in Star Wars movies was all deliberate. This was all part of the plan to double down on Star Wars. Double down by making it not just a boys' property, but a female, and double down by making it not a US property, but a Chinese property. The problem with the Chinese issue is that China never had Star Wars. I mean, they had the DVDs, but they never grew up playing with Star Wars and having the nostalgia, because there were no US movies in China back in the late 70s, early 80s. This is a new phenomenon. So without this cultural nostalgia base, the Chinese market basically just didn't jump on the Star Wars bandwagon, and the box office just kept shrinking and shrinking. The master plan was for the Chinese market to do half of Star Wars revenue, and that didn't really happen. With the loss of Chinese revenue and the loss of the girls' audience, I mean, yes, girls can play with Star Wars and should play with Star Wars, but let's face it, Star Wars is a boys' property. Strawberry Shortcake is a girls' property, and that's okay. It's okay for boys and girls to have their own properties. Not everything should work for everyone. In fact, when you try to make something kind of be what it's not organically supposed to be as part of its DNA, you wind up with something that's not sort of anything at all. And I think, there's a reason that you don't even see the sequel, the Disney sequel, the Rey and the Poe and the Finn characters at market anymore. They didn't sell. People weren't getting emotionally attached. Yet the Mandalorian, you can't even find him on pegs. I mean, he is flying off the pegs. Speaking of pegs, the whole metaphor of, trying to get a square peg into a round hole, getting Star Wars to be a girls' property and a Chinese property, while ignoring the fact that they already have this huge US male fan base. And yes, there are Star Wars female fans. I'm not saying there aren't, but the majority is male. And as Yoda said, that is why you fail. The reason that the sequel movies weren't hitting is because they were trying to inorganically turn Star Wars into something it isn't. Versus Mandalorian has an awesome male hero with a jetpack, with a mask, and he's got a cute baby sidekick. It's everything. It's perfect, and it feels like Star Wars. And that's why I love Mandalorian. And I will continue to watch Mandalorian. And honestly, for the first time in forever, I feel like Star Wars is good again. And I am so excited for Star Wars. As a fan, as a professional, let's have some more. I love it. If you like this video and want to see more like it, please do subscribe and give the video a like, because that tells YouTube to share it with more people, and that's kind of the whole point. Share toy and pop culture love. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I answer every single one. And see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.